You're now live, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, good evening, everyone. Happy New Year to all of you. Welcome to this first meeting of the Housing, Planning, Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Most of you are seasoned practitioners, so I don't need to remind members. Please, if you could mute yourselves unless called to speak, so that we don't get overload. And it's helpful for visitors if you could, if invited to speak, if you could first of all introduce yourselves so that visitors know who it is speaking. We'll take declarations of interest as necessary, and if you could register anything through the chat box facility. And if you wish to speak, it's also helpful if you could do that through the chat facility, so that I hopefully don't miss anyone in that fashion. Item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence, and so far as I'm aware we have two from Kevin Proctor and Amy White, both of Trafford.
That's it, Chair.
Thank you. Chair's announcements, urgent business. There's nothing been brought to my attention. Therefore, we stick to the agenda. Declaration of interest. If you have a declaration, as I said, could you record that in the chat box, please, so that we have the record? And can I remind you that the chat box does become a matter of public record. So it's not helpful to make unwise comments in that chat facility. I know of at least one member who's been caught out, not on this meeting, but elsewhere, by making comments. And if you haven't completed your declaration of interest form which has been circulated, could you please do so and ensure it's returned as appropriate. Item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of November 2020. These have been circulated.
True, class them as a true record, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I hear no one dissenting, so I take that as being acquiescence to that. So we come then to the substance of the meeting, item 5, the Living with COVID Resilient Plan Progress update. This is a report of the Mayor. Joanne, who's going to lead on this one, please?
Simon Noakes taking the lead on this, Chair. Simon Noakes.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, Chair. Just introduce myself, Simon Noakes. I'm the Exec Director for Policy and Strategy for Greater Manchester Combined Authority. So that you will remember I previously talked to you about the 1 year Living with COVID plan that we put together to through the recovery coordination group, really looking at that point when we put it together, which was in September, where we felt potentially the COVID crisis was waning slightly and we might be moving into more of a recovery phase. But it was really to capture the issues and inequalities that had come up during COVID, and to have a first view about how we might deal with them within Greater Manchester. Reason for it being a 1 year Living with COVID plan is A, that we recognise that we would be living with COVID until a vaccine came on board, and secondly, obviously we had the Greater Manchester strategy that was due to be refreshed in 2020 COVID, not the bridge between. In the report on page 15, you've got what I describe as the heat map, which looked at all the inequalities that had been laid bare by COVID, and this report is looking at August and September, looking at where or and the first thing to say is that obviously the situation is not as we expected it to be. Obviously the COVID crisis is carried on and become even worse than it was then, and that anybody could have potentially expected it to. And so actually not a lot of the work that we were planning in terms of recovery had been put on hold because we're still responding to the crisis. Having said that, we've looked at all of the part of the work of this report in the review of the 3 months and the work of the recovery coordination group. It has looked at each of those inequalities and each of these issues in the and looked at whether they are still relevant.
Simon, I'm not going to be uncharitable. Simon, I'm not being uncharitable. Could you turn off your camera?
What we have found.
Simon, we're not receiving you very well. You're breaking up. Could you turn off your camera to see if that improves the audio?
Okay,
please.
Is that better?
Marginally.
Okay, I'll try. I'm not sure what's happened there. Right, let me know if that's any better.
That's a lot better, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So as I say, we've looked at each of the issues, and what we found is that the issues that we reported back in September have actually become even more strongly the issues that have been raised by COVID over the next 3 months. So say we discovered that the issues that we thought were being exposed by COVID in those earlier days actually genuinely have become the issues, and if anything, all of those sort of, those that were red are even redder, as it were, and even more pronunciated. As I've said, there is work going on, and some good work going on to look at each of those issues, and that's outlined, as I say, in the body of the report. I think a number of things just to highlight. Firstly, some excellent partnership work going on. We always believed that the solution to those inequalities would be around a system-wide approach rather than an individual agency responding to those, and that indeed has been the case. And there are some phenomenal innovations that have been going on in terms of how we're dealing with some of those issues. But I think it's also true to say that we're recognising that the sort of scale and longevity of the challenges faced by COVID and the fragilities of the system are huge, and those will be fed into the refreshed Greater Manchester strategy, and I'll say a word about that in a second. In the report, we've also updated the GMS data, the Greater Manchester strategy data. That was data that we were refreshing on a 6-monthly basis, looking at how we were against some of our GMS targets. One of the things that has thrown up is that a lot of that data is very lagging. So a lot of the economy data, for example, against the targets we set, is showing that the economy a lot of those indicators are green, but that's because a lot of the data is somewhat out of date. And one of the things that we've been looking at through the recovery coordination group is how we get more accurate data and how we get better sort of community intelligence built into future iterations of the Greater Manchester strategy. And I have to say the recovery coordination group's been brilliant in helping us with that work, and will continue to be so. The other thing that we said in the recovery, in the 1 year living with COVID plan, is there were 3 mechanisms that we wanted to look at to really think about how we were going to tackle inequalities in a different way, and the inequalities laid bare by COVID in a different way than we have perhaps had done in the past. One of those things clearly will be building inequalities into the new strategy in a far more fundamental way. But 3 mechanisms that we particularly on. One was that all combined authority reports and indeed all LEP reports now have recommendations around not only the financial element of the report, but also the implications on equalities issues and the implications on environmental issues as well. So trying to take economic, social and environmental issues in the round when we're making recommendations to the combined authority. The second mechanism was to strengthen the work of the Tackling Inequalities Board, or strengthen the work around equalities by the formation of a Tackling Inequalities Board, and that board taking this holistic view around all the inequalities issues that have been laid bare by COVID. And of course, we've got the Inequalities Commission that is also going on. And that will report back with recommendations about how we are thinking about those inequalities. And the final mechanism that we've put in place, or that we are beginning to put in place, is considering whether we should be using sort of floor targets at a neighbourhood level when we're looking at issues at a Greater Manchester level. So recognising that if you've got one ward where they've got very high level, or where you have very high levels of free school meals, for example, that's just as much of an issue to the whole of Greater Manchester as it is to that particular neighbourhood or that particular district. And that approach will be considered as part of the refresh of the Greater Manchester strategy. And as I say, that's the kind of the nature of the report was very much an update on where we were 3 months on from the publication of the 1 year living with COVID plan. It's obviously only 3 months on, but we recognise that I think the heat map that I've mentioned is still a very good summary of the issues that COVID is exposing. There are obviously huge financial pressures. We are absolutely in the heart of the health crisis, but actually the health crisis is, as I say, throwing a lot of other issues up that we will need to build into our approaches moving forward. We're beginning to do that, but we're also recognising that actually this approach is going to have to be built into the new Greater Manchester strategy when that's produced later on in the year. So we'll be producing another update report in a further 3 months, working with the Recovery Coordination Group, as I said, and we'll keep you updated on that. But I'm very happy to take any questions on the details in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. At the moment, I've got 3 members indicating Councillor Wilson Godwin, please, then Councillor Billington and Councillor Augustus, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and to you, Simon, thank you very much for the report. I do recognise that when we're reading a report like this, it's the synthesis of a huge amount of work, and I think it's very easy to lose sight of that. So, you know, just thank you very much to all the staff who've worked together on putting that together, and on indeed for all the work that is being done to sustain the city region's resilience during the COVID crisis. I wanted to make a point about inequality, and I felt a bit hesitant about this in a sense, because obviously this is the Scrutiny Committee that is looking at planning, housing and environment, and so in a sense it's not part of our core business, but on the other hand, the point I wanted to make feeds through into everything. In the section where inequality is discussed, to me there is one very glaring inequality that is missed, and it's that of class. And class cuts through all of those other inequalities which are mentioned: BAME people, women, old people, and everything. And it seems to me that makes an enormous difference in how people are both impacted by the crisis and on what is likely to be happening to them during the crisis, and how resilient they, as an individual, as a family, are going to be able to come through it. Now, I do realise that it's not properly recognised as an equality under equalities law, but nevertheless, by ignoring it, we are missing one of the most, profound inequalities that exist in our society. So I would welcome some comment on that, and some looking at whether or not it is possible to take that into account, directly rather than through some kind of proxy means. Second thing, this is a really small point, but in parts of where we're talking about some of the ways in which the city is developing new sectors, things to come out of the crisis, and talking about the carbon sector, and on page 31 we're talking about the Green Homes Grant. It talks about using the Green Homes Grant for 156 buildings, and I kind of wondered whether that was really right, because it just seems to me that there's an issue of scale here, and 156 buildings doesn't even begin to get to pilot level, does it, when we're talking about something in the scale that we're talking about? So thanks very much, Sal.
Thank you. Simon, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, I can do. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave the camera on. It's just easier to interact. But
yes.
if you can't hear me, then let me know, obviously. So thank you for those comments, Councillor. I think one of the answers to this is the whole issue of inequalities is fundamental to Greater Manchester, or life in Greater Manchester, both economically, socially and environmentally, and that's one of the reasons why we've set up the Independent Inequalities Commission to really look at these issues in a lot more detail, and they will report back early in this year, and that their recommendations, their findings, will actually influence the way in which the next Greater Manchester strategy is developed. And on page, I think it's page 20, I'm just trying to find it. Yeah, we've done the diagram on page 20 begins to look at a number of different ways in which you can think about inequalities, and we're not saying that we're sort of settled on that particular model at the moment, but actually looking at the sort of horizontal demographic characteristics inequalities, and then the sort of vertical ones. And in some ways, class isn't in there specifically, as you say, but actually income inequalities is in there as a sort of vertical, and that's a proxy for what you're talking about. So I think the key answer to your question, Councillor, is that this is early thinking, but the Inequalities Commission will very much help us in terms of its recommendations and thinking about the way in which these issues are then tackled in Greater Manchester moving forward. In terms of the Green Homes grant, it's 156 public sector buildings. I know it's not. Again, it was about the amount of money that was available for the number of buildings that could be looked at this particular point in time. But it's, I think I'm right in saying it's 156 public sector buildings.
Thank you. I've got now Councillor Billington, Councillor August and Councillor Walker. Councillor Billington, please.
Is it okay to continue with my camera off? It's just my connection's quite bad tonight as well. Yep. Or do I need my camera on?
We can hear you perfectly well, Councillor Billington. Thank you. That's fine.
Oh, that's enough as it is. Okay. So I just got two questions. Well, one is a question and one is a comment. We talk about living with COVID, and one of the things that's happening now is that many businesses in Greater Manchester are struggling. GMCA and the Mayor was given £60 million by the government to distribute discretionary grants to businesses in need. I just want to know what is happening with those grants. It's been reported recently that Bury Council has only given away 3% of those grants. So what is GMCA doing in regards to ensure that businesses get the support that they need? The money is there. It just seems that it isn't being given out to support businesses. The second one is a comment, basically. We talk about building back better, and it sort of feeds into what Mandy has said. For a while now, there has been a great focus on building Manchester city centre up at the expense of leaving behind satellite boroughs and towns in these working class areas, as Mandy was alluding to, and these people feel very much forgotten. So as part of building back better, what is the Mayor planning to do to ensure that we build better back in our towns rather than building back better for Manchester city centre? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just picking up on both of those issues, obviously the Economic Scrutiny Committee will be looking at detail in terms of the issues of business, supporting businesses through COVID, and has in fact done so at some of its previous meetings. Specifically, the there is £60 million across Greater Manchester. That was money that was given to each of the individual local authorities. It was routed through the combined, or some of it was routed through the combined authority, not all of it, but it was directly money for each individual local authority to work to support businesses in each of the localities. So each borough is working on that. There is a phenomenal amount of money that has gone out to businesses in Greater Manchester. After that money was allocated, the government also then introduced a raft of schemes to support businesses. They had support, and still exists, support for businesses who are closed. And the government has recently enhanced that support for businesses that are closed, i.e. those that are forced to close under legislation due to COVID restrictions. There's also support available for businesses that are open but that are impacted by the reduction in, particularly in hospitality, leisure and accommodation sector. And in addition, as you say, Councillor Billington, the local authorities have got this money called additional restrictions grants. Each local authority, and the government was very clear that this money was to support the economies initially to last up till March 21, and each local authority is looking at how they support businesses best in their own boroughs. There were two particular areas that were looked at. One is about supporting businesses that aren't able to access other forms of grant in terms of the open grants or the closed grants, and also then looking at businesses that are important to each local economy. And as I say, each district has got a plan of how it intends to roll out that additional restrictions grant over the coming weeks. I know a substantial amount of work is going on to get that money out, but as I say, each district is taking a slightly different approach to how that's being used. In terms of building back better, one of the things the local enterprise partnership has done is to publish the economic vision for Greater Manchester, and that's a revised economic vision which talks about building back better. It talks about building a fairer and a greener Greater Manchester, and as part of that, very much looking at the issues of how you drive growth and economic recovery in both our towns and in our cities, and the two working very much hand in hand together, and particularly the role of innovation to drive economic growth and business productivity across the whole of Greater Manchester, not just within the city centre, whilst also recognising that a strong city centre is important for a strong whole of Greater Manchester.
Thank you, Simon. Councillor August, Councillor Walker, and then Councillor Mobbs, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this report. I really appreciate it, and I really do like that the focus is on intersectionality as well with the inequalities. One of the groups I thought was missed out that isn't covered by the intersections that you mentioned earlier was care leavers, who obviously face really disproportionately low outcomes for them. Another part of the report I was interested in was the reliance on the VCSE sector for a lot of this partnership, who have obviously been really badly hit by COVID in terms of their funding streams. And I wondered if you had things in place to help the sector, because a lot of those places are saying that they are going to close, and if we are to recover, we need them to stay open, frankly. And another comment was on the completion of Everybody In and ABEN. One of the issues that we've had with people coming out of Everybody In is people who are no recourse. There are no beds for them to go into, and a lot of the rough sleepers on our streets now are people with no recourse, especially non-EU no recourse, where we have a finite number of beds, and when they are filled, there are no move-on options for them. So the vast majority of people who are entrenched rough sleeping now who want to come in, not that they have other barriers, are people with no recourse. And I wondered if we had plans to extend our no recourse ABEN or bed facilities.
Thank you, Councillor August. I think I'll have to come back to you on the ABEN and no recourse point, because I'm afraid I'm not aware of the detail. Obviously covering the whole agenda, not aware of the detail on that specific issue, so I have to come back on that particular point. On the VCSC sector that you mentioned, yeah, very much working closely with the voluntary community sector. COVID has absolutely shown our reliance on the sector in terms of some of the key aspects of Greater Manchester life, and very much working with the sector about the future of the sector, and in fact it is clearly one of the key elements of the 1 year living with COVID plan. It's in there, and also as part of the implementation of working on the implementation of the social value framework and working about contracted provision to the voluntary community sector as part of the overall social and support infrastructure of Greater Manchester. So it's very much an issue we recognise. There's no easy solutions. There is a huge funding issue in the voluntary community sector, but we're definitely working on that as best we can. And care leavers are absolutely a hugely important part of tackling inequalities, and I'll pick that point up in terms of the future iterations of the report.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah.
You wanted to speak.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, to be honest, a bit disappointed with the report, and the main reason, and I know you touched on it to be fair in what you were saying, but it is so out of date. It's embarrassingly out of date, and one thing we have learnt about what's happening now is that the world's moving fast and they expect us to be agile on our feet, and I would have liked some reassurance that the next time we get this report, it will be far more up to date than this. You know, this report feels like it was done about, mid-November or something like that. And so please reassure me that we're going to be a lot more up to date by the next time we're looking at this report.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. The report was produced in I think it was the 1st of December, because it went to the Combined Authority meeting on the 12th or 13th of December, something of that order. The world has changed very substantially in a very short period of time, so I can assure you it was up to date when it was written, but it is a question just of timing of scrutiny committee meetings that it now feels somewhat out of date. Having said that, I think there's two aspects. There's a lot of we've deliberately in an annex included all the Greater Manchester strategy data, which is definitely out of date. It's the most accurate data we've got, but a lot of those data sets are now feeling very out of date. But we've included that for information, because obviously the Greater Manchester strategy was due to be refreshed in 2020, and I've said already that one of the things we're going to need to look at in the new Greater Manchester strategy is a far greater focus on inequalities and sort of community intelligence being incorporated into that in a far more live way. In terms of the current crisis, obviously we've got the tackling of the response mechanism to COVID and responding to COVID and the crisis, and then the elements of recovery. And I think I would say that the report is still up to date in terms of the inequalities that COVID has laid bare. So I think it's accurate and up to date in that sense, and was very accurate in terms of the state of the progress of COVID within Greater Manchester at the time it was written. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mobbs, please.
Thank you, Chair. Simon, first of all, can I say thank you very much for the report and reiterate what Councillor Shilton Godwin said. I recognise a lot of work has gone into this, and it's a very, very rapidly changing situation. So almost before your ink's dried, something else has happened and things change. And I think that keeping up to date is virtually impossible in those circumstances. I'm glad you mentioned some neighbourhood level data, because that's particularly pertinent for people in Stockport, where there are such huge gaps between the most well-off wards and the least well-off wards, and an average figure for Stockport doesn't always give a true reflection of the levels of need there are in certain areas. So I'm really pleased about that. I just want to pick up a couple of points now on the details of the deliverables. One is about the digital exclusion, and I'd just like to sort of reiterate the need to make sure that there is a provision of assistive technology in there for people who need it. I think many of us rely on technology and often forget that it's not always easy and accessible for everybody. But to support that, I would ask that some considerations given to training health and social care staff to be able to use some assistive technologies or to access it as and when required, because sometimes I'm aware of a case where someone with a visual impairment went into hospital. She had an adapted telephone, but none of the staff knew how to use it. So until her husband could visit, which was really difficult, she wasn't able to have any contact. So training for staff is as important as the provision of the equipment. And my final point is about the rebuilding and the economic regeneration as and when we get to that point. And as you said, we thought we might be getting near there now, but here we are. I just wonder if any consideration has been given to procurement issues, and whether there's any consideration to look at procurement so that we can, Greater Manchester can do it in such a way that it will facilitate small, medium-sized enterprises on a local and regional basis being able to bid, and in that way keeping more money that's invested in the local area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mugby. Just picking up on those, definitely the neighbourhood data is something that we hadn't obviously got in the last Greater Manchester strategy. It's clearly we need to think carefully about that and incorporate it as we can. And a lot of, as I said, one of the third mechanism was very much about thinking about that neighbourhood data. So and floor targets. So definitely pick up on that. You make some really good points around digital exclusion, and it's a massive issue. We're seeing that at the moment in terms of obviously the whole issue of access to laptops for young people to learn from home. But you make some really good points about assisted technology and training on that on those technologies, and I'll pick those up with colleagues. And in terms of the economic rebuilding point you make, we are trying very much to get into those issues about procurement through the social value framework. So we have now got a revised social value framework, and that is very much about how we use how we include social considerations in the procurement that we do, both at a Greater Manchester level and also within each of the districts. So that social value framework is very much designed to pick up on those issues that you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. I've no further indication from members. Recommendations are that we're requested to review, note and provide comments on the progress made. I suspect that has already happened in the robust questioning to Simon. And are we therefore happy to note the report?
Note the report, Chair.
Thank you. We move then to next item on the agenda, item 6, Greater Manchester preparations for EU exit and updated analysis of possible economic impacts. Simon, the floor is yours once again, I believe.
Thank you, Chair, and I will. Sorry, just trying to find the right page on the report. I will take us through this report now. Sorry, apologies. Really wanting to assure colleagues that we've been over many months been looking at the issues in terms of preparedness for EU exit. Well, in actual fact, it's the preparedness for the end of the transition period. And obviously you'll be aware, obviously, that on the 31st of December that transition period indeed ended. And obviously there was in the end a trade and cooperation agreement agreed that obviously primarily covers goods rather than services, but it does obviously cover issues, some issues around obviously around law enforcement, and also some overarching governance arrangements for the deal. And I'll come on to that in a little bit. There is a link to the full text of the agreement if anybody wishes to read that clearly. But we've been looking very much about whether Greater Manchester was prepared in whole raft areas on page 52 and 53 primarily, so around our borders, around transport, around health, food, energy, etc., etc. Skills are a significant issue as well. And also about data and data equivalence, which is a big issue for or formerly with our trade with the EU. We've been looking at all those issues in terms of were we prepared, both on a sort of day one basis, but also on an ongoing basis. Now, obviously, so late in the day, are a number of issues that are working their way through the system. I think it's fair to say, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but I think it's fair to say that obviously there was concerns about what would happen on the 1st of January. The fact that a deal was done probably alleviated a lot of those sort of day one issues, but there are issues that are now coming to light in terms of changes to the way that we trade with the EU. For example, more paperwork required for transitioning goods across the EU. And some of those issues will come to the fore in the coming weeks, and then obviously also in the longer term. So we're aware certainly of a number of companies that are effectively created some stock of had some stock of goods, and therefore were able to continue trading, and actually as that stock begins to replace, or the raw materials begin to need to be replaced, then the issues of paperwork, etc., and how they trade with the EU will come to the fore. There are obviously clearly reports on the TV news about some logistics issues, particularly for companies transporting refrigerated goods in terms of time critical goods, and then, as I say, there will be issues that come to the fore in terms of the longer term issues, some of which are already dealt with in the deal that was signed. So, for example, one of the big issues that we were concerned about is around data equivalence. So, can we move data freely between the UK and the EU? And in the deal effectively allows data to be moved on the same basis it was being moved for a period of 4 months, which can be extended by a further 2-month period, so effectively up to 6 months. And in that period, the UK will be trying to agree an equivalence arrangement, i.e. regarding our data arrangements as equivalent to the EU's data arrangements. And if that is signed, that will again then help deal with a lot of issues about data transfer between us and the EU. But we won't know the impact of that obviously for up to 6 months. And then finally, in terms of the deal, it doesn't cover primarily doesn't cover the service sector, and obviously particularly the financial services and how the financial services sector develops. And obviously decisions made by companies over the coming months will be crucial in terms of the way in which Brexit ultimately has economic, social and environmental impacts for Greater Manchester. A few other points to mention. We have now, as part of the deal, agreed to remain as part of the Horizon programme, which is a significant programme in terms of research and innovation. So we will take part in that as a non-EU associate member. And that's a positive thing in terms of the overall R&D work and the innovation work of the UK. In terms of our moving forward and thinking about life outside of the EU, clearly our international strategy is hugely important, and we have updated that, or we are updating it. and so apologies, we are updating that, and the way in which that moves forward will be hugely important in terms of positioning Greater Manchester in or outside of the EU. In paragraph 5 onwards, and I'm not going to go through this in any great detail, but we've analysed, and we've been doing this over a period of time. We analysed the export value from Greater Manchester to the EU, really just to understand the scale of exports to the EU, and therefore the potential scale of exposure, depending on exactly the way in which I think events pan out. And there's quite a lot of detail on that in the report. And then on page 60 of the report, we looked at labour market issues and labour market impacts, and again looking at the number of EU residents, so non-EU residents, sorry, EU and non-EU residents who are working in Greater Manchester, and then given you information on the points-based migration system. Again, I think it's fair to say that actually it'll take time for us to understand the impact of the points-based migration system on the GM economy, and we will continue to analyse the impacts as they come through. We produce a dashboard of the economy every month, and we're to Councillor Walker's earlier point, we've got some fairly accurate and up-to-date data in that dashboard, and that dashboard goes to the Combined Authority every month, and that will give us the latest state of the economy. What we won't really be able to understand for some time is the extent to which the economy is changing due to COVID, and the extent to which it's changing due to Brexit. And obviously those two things are sort of conflated in the economic data that we've got, but we are certainly keeping a very close eye on all the issues that Brexit will throw up immediately and over the coming months. And I'll probably leave it at that as an introduction. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I have two members at the moment indicating, Councillor August and then Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report, Simon. It goes over sort of quite a lot of different areas. I'm just going to focus in on one. It comes back to sort of what I asked you earlier, so I'm not sure if you'll know the answer to this, but in point 7.5, you talk about the different benefits that EU residents will be able to claim going forward, and that anyone who doesn't have indefinite leave to remain, so has been here less than 5 years, will no longer be accessing benefits. And I wondered if you'd considered the impact this would have on homelessness. If anybody is currently receiving housing benefit and will no longer be able to make rent, which is quite a large number of people as they are in lower paid work and will be topped up with benefits to be able to pay their rent, will become homeless, and then they are at the mercy of what we have in Manchester. And they won't be eligible for a bed every night accommodation because they won't have recourse to funds, and a bed every night, the business model relies on housing benefit eligibility. So I wondered if you had thought, if we do have a large influx of no recourse people coming onto the street, what are we going to do, and how are we going to accommodate these people who might still well be working but can't afford to house themselves?
Thank you, Councillor August. I will have to come back to you on that point. I've got colleagues who are looking at this in detail. I know that. I'm not sure if any of them are on the call tonight who could give you an answer tonight, but I'll certainly can go away and come back to you on that point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Councillor Gibson, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Simon. Very informative report. I've just got kind of one quick comment, and I just say I've chosen to not take part in the Erasmus scheme, and that students at our Greater Manchester universities won't be able to take part in that scheme as so many of their predecessors did. I know it's a fantastic scheme, and that's a loss to Greater Manchester and to all university students. My substantive question really is given all the things we've seen on the news recently and all the challenges we're clearly having with food supply and medicine supply, has there been any thought given to perhaps this group meeting more regularly than once a month, particularly with the very changeable nature of the situation we're in? Thank you. There
is a economic resilience group that looks at all economic issues, and that reports into the strategic coordination group that's obviously looking at COVID particularly, but obviously looking at all issues to do with the situation that we're in right now, COVID or otherwise. There is also, say, a GM Brexit group, and that will meet as regularly as it needs to meet. At the moment, there are no sort of obviously there are lots of issues. There are lots of issues that are being dealt with. A lot of that is about working through new systems, but if we need to meet more regularly, that group would meet as and when was needed. And in terms of sort of specific advice and help to businesses, obviously the work of the Growth Company and Growth Hub is there on a sort of day-to-day basis to help companies through the issues that they may face. So I don't know if that answers your question, Councillor, but hopefully it does.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Two things. Firstly, I think we need to put something forward as an action on behalf of our committee from this report, especially with what's going on with Brexit. And maybe at some time in the future we need to invite somebody here that can answer questions on the Brexit front from the resilience group that I am aware of. So I think it's something that for us as a committee, that we can do an action plan regarding. I've got great concerns of what's going to happen with regards to, as I put in the chat room, all the food that's going to go to waste, medical equipment that's going to be out of date for people, and how we can resolve that in a shorter term. So I think that's something we could probably do as a committee, Chair, you know, just a suggestion. And if you can give me any answers to them comments, I'd be quite happy.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Simon,
Yep.
Councillor Robinson
Yep.
raises 2 points of chat box. I don't know if you've seen them.
Yeah, it's France and Germany at the moment are turning away with the food that's supposed to be coming to us and not even coming through because of the red tape. They're refusing to deliver anything to the UK, and on top of that, they've said that because they're doing that in France and Germany, any medical supplies coming from places like Germany could be out of date by the time it gets to our chemists, and patients will not have their medication that they need if it's come from those countries.
As I say, the GM Brexit group is looking at all of these issues, and in fact it met either earlier this week or last week. I can't actually remember whether it was earlier this week or not. But it will keep an eye on those issues. To date, we're not aware of any significant delays. Sorry, we're aware of the issues, but we're not aware that that's having a significant impact within Greater Manchester. But that's one of the things, obviously, we're keeping a very close eye on.
Thank you very much indeed. Recommendations are on the cover sheet. Members happy to confirm those.
Chair, could I just come back to a point of Councillor Robinson, please?
Councillor Billington, yes, please.
Okay. Councillor Robinson, you were saying about an impact on medicines. This country has done really well in securing COVID vaccination, and many of which have come from manufactured in EU countries. And we are doing significantly better than other EU countries in vaccinating our population, and that should be congratulated.
That's not that I'm having a go at, Councillor Billington. That's not what I'm having a go at. It's just a concern I've got that it's actually been recognised today that some people will have medications that will run out of date before they've had time to have them, and it's got nothing to do with what we're doing with the NHS and the medication on that sector. This is your general stuff that goes into chemists. I'm not having to go at anything else, because I think what we've done in this country so far is brilliant.
Thank you, Councillor.
That's not what I'm having to go at.
I think your point has been noted in the chat box, Councillor Robinson, and further updates at future meetings will, as Simon has just said, address some of those issues on an ongoing basis.
Yep.
At this early date, when it is at the moment very much at the initial points. and government have acknowledged there will be delays potentially at the outset whilst the systems are settled down and bedded in. And I think the important thing is, Simon, that we bring reports forward, please, to this committee, confirming that in fact those arrangements have bedded in and there's been no adverse impact on Greater Manchester. I think that's our role as a scrutiny committee at the present time. Members happy therefore to note the report in that manner? Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yes.
I think, Simon, that probably now relieves of your reporting at this point.
Thank you, Chair.
We move to item 7, which is the Greater Manchester Transport Strategy 2040. And as I see Simon Warburton online, I assume that Simon is going to lead on this one. But if you have colleagues, could you introduce them, please, Simon?
I will do. Thank you very much, Chair.
I trust members have read all 400 pages or thereabouts of the strategy document.
I very much hope so. There'll be a written test at the end. I'm joined by my colleagues Nicola Kane and Jonathan Marsh, and members will recall that I think it was at the October meeting of Scrutiny Committee. Nicola and I came along at the time and talked about the broad shape and approach to the revision of the Transport Strategy and Delivery Plan, which collectively will form the revised statutory local transport plan for Greater Manchester. And we discussed with members and agreed at the time that when the final draft was ready for presentation to the combined authority, that we'd bring it forward to scrutiny first. And so the draft is attached, which we're proposing to take to the combined authority meeting at the end of January. And if you're happy, Chair, I'm just going to hand briefly to Nicola and Jonathan just to remind members of the approach that we've taken before we then open up for questions.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Simon. I think, Jonathan, you're going to bring just a handful of slides up. So as Simon says, there are two main documents which will be taken to the combined authority at the end of the month for approval. The first is a refresh of the 2040 transport strategy, which was originally published back in 2017, and which we've now taken the opportunity to bring up to date to make sure it reflects kind of contemporary issues around transport. And as I think we flagged last time, actually an awful lot has moved on since 2017. So in particular, it updates around the Our Vision network, which the Mayor set out or probably around 18 months ago now. We have a major focus on what we call our right mix ambition, which is our ambition for 50% of all trips to be made by sustainable modes by 2040. And one of the documents which is attached is actually an appendix which sets out more detail on that. For those of you that are interested in some of the thinking that went into developing that target. There's also, as you'd expect, a lot more emphasis on active travel and the development of the B network, and updated sections, much more emphasis around the climate emergency and the clean air plan. Again, those have risen rapidly up the policy agenda since 2017, although they were key parts of the original document, but now have greater emphasis and greater detail. We've obviously had to make some amendments around the spatial planning context. All the work that we did to support the GM spatial framework is still very relevant. Many of the planning priorities remain, and we have a significant transport evidence base that supports that work. So obviously we've had to amend some of the references to GMSF following Stockport's withdrawal in December, but the context is still all very relevant. And there's some updated sections on bus reform. And then finally, we've got some a little bit more detail around work that we've been doing on sub-strategies, so in particular around our policy agenda on Streets for All, the city centre transport strategy, which was consulted on in the autumn, and we'll be looking to bring forward over the next 2 or 3 months, and around our long-term ambitions for rapid transit, and last but not least, town centre regeneration. So it's largely the same document, but has been brought up to date through a number of light touch refreshes. And then the second substantial document is the 5-year delivery plan, which we consulted on back in 2019, and has now been finalised, ready to bring forward for development over the coming months and years. So this sets out a detailed pipeline for infrastructure schemes and service improvements that we want to bring forward to deliver our network vision. It is aligned with the spatial planning priorities for GM, and has also been updated since the 2019 version, obviously to reflect some of the potential impacts of COVID-19 and how this plan can support recovery from the pandemic as restrictions are released. It was informed by a lot of feedback that we got through the consultation that ran alongside the last GMSF consultation, and we've done an awful lot of work with the 10 local authorities and a range of other stakeholders to produce this final plan, which has included an initial carbon review of proposed schemes, and there will be more work to assess the carbon impacts of individual interventions as those are developed. We've got some updated investment maps, and Jonathan will briefly describe what's on those investment maps, which are in the delivery plan, and sets out our ask of government. And we've got a little bit more clarity around potential funding from government since the spending review in the autumn, and that so we've updated in terms of the latest position on that in this delivery plan. And then last but not least, the plan will be accompanied by 10 local implementation plans. There are still some minor amendments being made to some of those, so that they're not appended to this paper, you'll be glad to know. So it's saved you a few pages of reading, but each local authority will also have a local implementation plan which sets out more detail around local level priorities within each district. So I'll hand over to Jonathan, who'll give you a little bit more of the detail, particularly around the delivery plan, and then we're very happy to take questions and feedback on the documents.
Thanks, Nicola, and good evening, everyone. Apologies if my sound quality is not great and my connection's not been good over the last 5 or 10 minutes. So, Nicola, you may have to take over.
I suggest you maybe switch your video off, actually, Jonathan, because I think that may help.
Yeah. Yeah, the components of the delivery plan is articulating that future transport pipeline, and we've in particular done that through the 3 maps within the delivery plan. So the first map setting out those delivery commitments, those things that we're already delivering or working on nearer term delivery that have got funding.
Jonathan, I'm afraid we're not hearing you very well.
It's a bit robotic, isn't it? Shall I take over? Yeah, I'll take over if you can hear me clearly.
Thank you. Well, that's much better.
Yeah. So sorry about that, Jonathan. Yes, so we've got the 3 main maps. The first one is based around existing commitments, so things that are already funded and in the programme. Map 2 are those things that we're looking to develop finalise business cases for over the next 5 years, and hopefully get on with delivering, subject to funding. And Map 3 sets out some of the much longer term infrastructure elements which won't be delivered within the 5-year period, but which we need to start making good progress on in terms of developing business cases, designing schemes. So although it is a 5-year delivery plan, it gives you a good sense of the plan beyond the next 5 years, over the next sort of 10, 15 years and beyond. So if we can move on to the next slide, Jonathan. And then as I mentioned, there will be 10 local implementation plan. So as you can imagine, when you're producing a plan at a Greater Manchester level, it's hard to represent some of those really important but much more local schemes that are needed to support local neighbourhoods and local centres. So we've worked very hard with each of the 10 local authorities to produce a bespoke local implementation plan, which will help to guide delivery priorities and will help us to make the case for funding to bring forward those more local level schemes over the next 5 years. And the intention is that these will be live documents, so they can be developed over time as local priorities become clearer, as new development proposals come forward, as communities put forward proposals for their area, so we hope those will be very useful to local members in terms of shaping those priorities within your own local areas. So if we move on to nearly the final penultimate slide. So this just gives a sense of how all of those elements add up together. So the 2040 strategy sets out those high level challenges and opportunities, the high level principles that we'll pursue over the coming years. It sets out that high level target for 50% of trips to be made by sustainable modes. And then the delivery plan sets out more detail about how we're going to bring forward specific interventions and what we know about funding. And then we have that supported by the 10 local implementation plans. So as I said, those will be going to the Combined Authority at the end of the month, and subject to approval, we'll be publishing in early February. And then the really hard work begins to turn that delivery plan into reality over the coming months and years.
Thank you very much. Simon, you want to sum up before we take questions? Anything you want to add?
So I think the important point to stress, Chair, is that as the local transport plan, this we are proposing forms the policy base for transport through to the middle part of the decade, and actually that's incredibly important in the context of the work that we have underway with Department for Transport. So as part of the autumn budget, on the back of work that we'd been carrying out with officials for more than a year now, we were very pleased to see the department confirm a new local transport funding stream, the Intracity Transport Fund mechanism through to the middle part of the decade, and setting out our investment plans in such a contemporary way gives us an excellent opportunity now to bid into that fund over the coming months. So I think I would just commend to the committee that it's an incredibly timely publication that hopefully we can capitalise on very quickly.
Thank you very much. I've got 3 members at the moment indicating to speak: Councillor Shilton Godwin, Councillor Billington and Councillor August.
Thank you very much, Chair. And again, thank you very much for this report. It's not the first time I've sat in meetings and heard about the 2040 Transport Strategy Plan, and I just take my hat off, really. I can see it's a massive piece of work. The first thing I really wanted to say was how pleased I am to see how much in the intervening time the environment has changed with regard to active travel. In this conurbation, this is a massive issue. It's a massive issue for the climate emergency. It's a massive issue for public health, and I mean it's a massive issue for like the health, just generally the health and well-being and quality of life of everybody in the conurbation. But it's a huge piece of work. So even once this is through, I realise that it's only just beginning. I wanted to ask a couple of questions really about some details in it. The first one is about the clean air and the clean air plan, which is referenced, started page on 106. Our current clean air plans don't include anything to reduce the level of carbon. It's all about NO2 and PM 2.5. Now, I'm obviously really well aware that that is because that's what's been legally required, but I'm increasingly concerned that given the amount of time it's taken us to get this far, I'm wondering how we are going to manage somehow to retrofit the work that we've already done into making this a clean air zone, into making it a carbon reduction as well, because we're clearly going to have to, because it's about 30% of our carbon emissions. I'd be really interested to know what your views are on that. The second thing I wanted to talk about was road safety, and this is policy 14. I think there's a real crisis of bad driving, which I think we all pretty much saw during the crisis, during lockdown, when if you looked at graphs related to speed and the volume of traffic on the road, they formed like a fish shape, a complete inverse relationship. And the number of people killed and seriously injured on the roads, I think has gone up massively over this last year. It's a real concern. And what I noticed it says in the report is that you'd be working with the police to do education and engagement. But really, unless we do enforcement, unless people really think that there are going to be consequences for such terrible behaviour on the roads, I do not see how we are really going to bring about this change in active travel, because it is fear that keeps people from walking and from cycling. And it's pretty clear that a lot of the things that cause those problems are people just simply being on their phones. I'll leave it at that. I did have a third point, but it's much less important, so I'll leave it. Thanks very much. Thank you again.
No, thank you. Nicola may want to comment a little more on some of the streets policies that we're bringing forward, and certainly we are very alive to a number of the contemporary concerns that there are with regard to road safety. Historically, Greater Manchester has had a really very positive track record in terms of driving down the numbers of people who are killed or seriously injured each year on our roads. I think that there is undoubtedly some evidence that performance has plateaued to a degree in more recent years, and there is a very strong renewed focus in that regard. And actually, we're looking forward to the first tranche of pedestrian crossing measures coming forward in the next couple of months for agreement through the Mayor Cycling and Walking Fund programme, actually to look to start to carry that initiative forward further. With regard to carbon, the observation is really well made, and we've set out in the plan how we now need to revise our investment prioritisation processes to ensure that all of the decisions that we take are driven by a very clear and consistent understanding of carbon impact, and that's a mechanism that we'll be bringing forward for consideration and adoption by the combined authority on the back of the strategy, and as we start to bring forward a proposed pipeline for the new investment funds. And I should stress that the measures that we're proposing through the Clean Air Plan will also bring a carbon dividend, but the point's well made that isn't the principal focus of that particular plan. Nicola, Jonathan, do you want to say anything more on the streets approach at all?
I think enforcement is clearly an issue, and we need to make the case for more resourcing around enforcement. But I think there is a design issue here as well, which we're obviously very focused on, and certainly very high on Chris Boardman's agenda in terms of how do we design streets where which are just much safer for pedestrians and cycling pedestrians and cyclists, both in terms of safe crossing points, but also in terms of more segregated space. And we've set these very high quality design standards for that reason. Designing cycle infrastructure that you would feel happy letting your 12-year-old child use, for example. That sets a clear benchmark that that we're designing for everybody, and not just for experienced cyclists who are willing to take on the traffic. So I think there's two parts of this which we need to get right. And clearly infrastructure will take time to roll out, but we've obviously got a very major programme underway, and I think it's right that we hold ourselves to those high quality standards.
Thank you.
Just a minor point to add, if that's okay, just around how we're measuring this. And Councillor, you pointed out the statistics. I think we've also flagged within the update about measuring the perception of safety as well, and that being more important as well as a key measure going forward.
Yes, we haven't flagged that actually, but we've got an updated set of key performance indicators in the document, which you might have spotted, which looks like a rather long list, and it is because we're keen that we do really understand how well the plan's performing, not just in terms of what we're delivering on the ground, but what impact it's having on how people behave and how people perceive the transport network as well. So we've tried to establish indicators that look at people's perception, as well as looking at what services we're providing, because we think that's important to look at it through a customer's eyes, and not just through what we think we're delivering.
Thank you very much. Councillor Billington.
Hi, thank you for that. I've got a couple of questions. So I'll just go recently on to Chris Boardman. I really do think there is far too much emphasis on the cycling networks across GM, especially in areas where the topography doesn't fit, and you're trying to force these things onto people who aren't going to use them, and it's just going to be an absolute waste of money. We do need to look at, yes, how we can improve buses, yes, how we can improve Metrolink, how we can improve trains, and walking as well locally. The problem is, and I've said this in prior meetings, is that a lot of the jobs that people have are focused in certain areas. So you have Manchester City Centre and Trafford Park, which are massive employment areas, and there isn't a more even distribution of work across the Greater Manchester conurbation. That creates a huge number of problems and bottlenecks for people, such as in Tameside, you've got the M60 going to Stockport. That is a major bottleneck with people trying to get into Stockport. And Trafford Park, there's not many people going into Tameside in the morning to get to work, and what we need is people getting jobs locally in our local boroughs, which will cut down congestion and pollution, so they're not driving to work or even using public transport, because that still uses pollution. My point is on, I'm just going to go on to one of the maps now. I'm just going to go, I did have it up before, sorry. So on map 1, it says in the next 5 years we're committed to delivering, and a number of the projects on there, a great number of the projects have already been announced and funded through government and the Highways Agency. A lot of those are road improvement schemes, or just quite simple park and ride upgrades or station upgrades, which don't really add much into the end-to-end experience of people getting where they need to go. And then on map 2, there's like this big massive boom, like we aim to complete business cases for early delivery of. Well, those business cases cost a lot of money to develop, and my worry is how realistic are we going to deliver these projects? Because my worry is it going to be a case of that in 5 years' time you're going to have Andy Burnham, if he's still elected, that is, and not pass the mantle to someone else, or he's been booted out. That we're going to have a case on the steps of the Bridgewater Hall where he's saying, those nasty Conservatives, I wanted 90 million. and then they only offered me 60 million. We'll have 65 million, and it just ends into that. So I just think, is this going to be used as a political football within the next 5 years? My last point is, and it hasn't really been mentioned on the slides, is bus reform and the costs of that. I don't know if other members have seen these slides, but in Tameside we had a member development session on bus reform and the cost of that. And one of the slides was that for a central scenario A, which GMCA predicting is most likely the model that they're going to get, the cost of bus reform over the next 5 years on their central scenario A will cost taxpayers £96 million. If the government doesn't give any funding at all, then taxpayers will be forced to hand out £292 million over the next 5 years. And that isn't government money, that will be paid for by local taxpayers. Now, on the central scenario A, that would equate to an extra, let's have the numbers here. If you make a £96 million loss over 5 years, given the number of households, that would add £20.16 per household every single year to their mayoral precept, when it's already high enough as it is. So what is the mayor doing to bring these costs down? Because I think, you know, yes, the bus system doesn't really work at the moment, but to force a £20.16 increase onto taxpayers when the majority of them don't even use the bus, I think is a real tall order to ask for. Thank you.
Thank you. Simon?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to address the bus reform numbers first of all, because I think it's important just to explain what we've put out as the material to support the consultation. And obviously we've been holding briefing sessions with members across all authorities alongside other groups. The numbers that Councillor Billington referred to are our assessment of the costs that would be associated with maintaining the bus network that we have in Greater Manchester over the next few years, depending on different scenarios in terms of the return of demand to the bus system, and that those costs, as we've been keen to set out through the consultation document, are the same costs that would apply regardless of the model that is pursued for buses over the next few years in Greater Manchester. To explain the context, what we have obviously seen in Greater Manchester, as we've seen elsewhere over the past 12 months, is a decline in demand for travel by public transport. That's been encouraged in order to manage the impact of the pandemic, and through this year in total, the bus network in Greater Manchester will only have been maintained at its current level because of a further injection of grant from central government to cover the shortfall in revenues, and that clearly we haven't finished the financial year, but we know that will be in excess of £50 million. So what we needed to be able to do was to set out what the likely costs are of maintaining a bus network in Greater Manchester for the next few years, and we've set that out across a series of different scenarios. Our worst case scenario suggests that the shortfall in revenue could be as much as the 292 million that Councillor Billington referred to. we can broadly discount that scenario. That is a scenario where bus demand doesn't come back any greater than 25%. The reality is that just before Christmas, we actually saw bus demand up at about 70% of pre-pandemic levels, which actually demonstrates just how crucial bus services are, of course, to those people who've most needed to be able to return to work during the periods where they have been able to do so. So what we've set out in the consultation document is that the core cost of the franchising proposition remains the cost that we set out in the original consultation document, and that's got to do with a set of transition costs associated with the acquisition of assets if we were to go down a franchising route. The variable costs, according to changes in demand, will apply somewhere within the system, regardless of the of whether we find ourselves in a partnership or franchising model over the next few years, if we don't see 100% of demand return in the first order to buses. And I don't think we do expect to see demand return overnight. We recognise that it will take time. With regard to the MAP 2 schemes, it's a very good challenge that it's important how quickly could we bring forward those business cases. They are schemes that, with our colleagues in the local authorities, we're confident that we can bring forward to the middle part of the decade. And what we've done is to use that work to convince DfT that there is a case for investment in urban transport. And I referred before to the new intracity transport fund, which was confirmed in the autumn budget. That's a fund that's ring-fenced to mayoral combined authority areas only. It will mean that we have the opportunity, along with 7 other mayoral combined authority areas, to bid into what will be £2.5 billion worth of funding starting from April 22. And helpfully, in advance of that, government has set aside £50 million that we can bid into over the next couple of months, that will be available from April 2021, which will support business case development works. So we're to tap into government funding to support that work, which Councillor Billington is quite right is otherwise quite expensive work to undertake. So in preparing the plan, actually what we've been able to do is to help DfT to make the case to Treasury for the investment, and therefore I'm confident at this stage that we will be able to deliver most of those schemes that we've set out on MAP 2. Nicola, do you want to pick up the approaches that we're taking to cycling to make sure that they're relevant to local markets?
Yeah, so I think we're all aware that there's an awful lot of pretty short car journeys that are made all across Greater Manchester, which we think have potential to be made either on foot or by bike for many people. Clearly, we're at the sort of start of what we hope will be a period of transformation where we can start to build that culture, particularly around cycling, where we're starting from a low base, but where we think there's huge potential. And we know that other countries that have much higher levels of walking and cycling have invested over a long period of time to support that culture change. So we do need to invest in the right infrastructure. It's chicken and egg. Without that right infrastructure, I don't think we'll see that uptake in walking and cycling. I think walking is just as important as cycling, but we've obviously got some particularly big infrastructure challenges around cycling, which will take time to roll out. And there are new markets which I think we'll see emerging over the next 5 years or so around the use of e-bikes as well, where cycling potentially will become a more attractive option, you know, in areas which have a hillier topography and for slightly longer journeys. And again, other countries that are a bit ahead of us on this have seen really big uptake in e-bikes over recent years, and have seen a big increase in cycling amongst all parts of the population, not just sort of younger, fitter people, but all ages being able to take up cycling through e-bikes. So I think we totally accept that walking and cycling won't be suitable for every single trip, but we think there are a huge number of trips that could be made on foot and by bike, and that in turn will support local centres, will support children getting more active, will support older people getting more active, and will support the whole range of wider objectives for Greater Manchester.
Thank you. I've now got two further speakers, Councillor August and then Councillor Lindsay.
And me.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't realise my cat was quite so much in view. A lot of my questions have been answered, so thank you, and thank you for the report. It is incredibly comprehensive and clearly a lot of hard work. I tried my best to read all of it. I just skimmed it, I'm afraid. I just have a few questions that haven't been raised so far. There's a small mention in the report with regards to e-scooters, and I just wondered what contingencies and plans you put in place. I know the trials are going on and they're not properly legal yet, but if you had some thoughts as to how you might be integrating them. And I thought it in the appendix, there's 3 roads identified for resurfacing, and I thought earlier on in the report it said that was going to be part of the local implementation plans. So I wondered why they'd been identified as part of the GM 5-year plan. And you know, I know it says they're part of the key routes, or whatever that acronym stands for. So I wondered why they in particular have been identified, and if there were any others that could be. And with regards to what Mandy mentioned earlier in terms of safety measures, you mentioned that you were looking to improve some of the safety cameras or speed cameras. Is there anywhere in particular looking to do this, and what kind of improvements are we talking about? Are we talking about the volume of cameras or the sort of the sophistication of the technology?
Simon?
Shall I start on e-scooters? Members may be aware that we've had an e-scooter trial running on the Salford University campus since the autumn, and in spite of COVID, it has proven incredibly popular. We've been quite taken aback actually by the scale of uptake and the scale of use, and actually very few issues around vandalism and theft. So it's proving very useful, particularly amongst students getting around the campus, and it's giving us a really good opportunity to understand what the potential opportunities and risks are around e-scooters. And we are assuming that following these trials, that at some point in the relatively near future, that that e-scooters will be legalised, and this gives us an opportunity to give advice to government, to work with government around the monitoring of those trials, to make sure that the right regulations are put in around e-scooters as and when they come forward. So I think that the next steps will be to look at that trial, to look at potential other areas where perhaps similar rental trials could be run. You'll probably also be aware that we're working on a proposition around a GM bike hire scheme, so we need to bring those 2 propositions forward in an integrated way, and we'll also be looking at how you might integrate those kind of modes with public transport as well. So there's a lot more thinking and detailed work to do around that, but we're pleased that we've had the opportunity to run these trials in advance of them being rolled out more widely.
Thank you. Councillor.
So I was just wondering if Jonathan was aware of the resurfacing references, because yes, I think we would generally expect those to be in local implementation plans.
Yes, I think that's in relation to them being KRN projects or key route network specific. So having a broader GM role, and they're within the Manchester district area. So that's why they've been picked up as part of some of the bigger maintenance programs that are planned in Greater Manchester.
Sorry, could I just come back on that? It says Manchester on some of the roads, but some of them are actually in Salford and aren't particularly major roads. So that's why I thought it was quite puzzling. It's page 364, Eccles Old Road and Langworthy Road South. They're around the sort of media city development, but not particularly part of it. Regent Road, I can understand it is a very major road, but those two, I thought it was a bit puzzling.
We can certainly check on that, but you're right. Eccles New Road, South Langworthy Roads, Salford district. So we'll revisit that.
Thank you very much.
Well spotted.
Yep.
Councillor Livesey and Councillor Robinson, please.
Can I just ask regarding, is it me next?
No, Councillor Livesey, please.
All right, okay.
Hello there. I finally joined you. I wanted to come back to public transport. We've seen so many people obviously are now using cars, compared to a year ago. We've got an awful lot of traffic on the roads, and how are we going to entice people back into public transport? Particularly, I'm worried about this question of costs. It isn't cheap, and we know that the levels of costs for public transport buses, it's higher in the northwest than it is in London and so on. There are big issues here which engage with this levelling up so-called agenda. But how can we actually engage with that? What sort of coalition can we build with other local authorities? Because there's no way we're going to get buses cheaper, which they'll have to be if we're going to get a significantly larger numbers of bus usage. I mean, I'm all for the active travel, but when we're faced with it, we do need more people using different forms of public transport, and they won't unless the cost is reduced. So that's really my issue, particularly stark now that we're into this COVID context where people are getting used to using cars and presumably have bought second-hand cars, invested and have a sort of stake now in that. Thanks very much.
No, thank you, Councillor, and it's an incredibly important point right now in the context of planning for the next few years, following on from the pandemic. So as I mentioned before, public transport as a whole right across the country has been supported by a series of emergency grants, and we recognise that the emergency grants and the nature that they exist at present cannot continue for a long period of time, and there's a concerted piece of work at the moment that's underway both locally between Transport for Greater Manchester and the Department for Transport, and also collectively through what's called the Urban Transport Group, which is where we come together with the other major urban area transport authorities to set out what we think is an appropriate and achievable path back to market recovery for each of the public transport modes. And in the first instance, we see that as the utmost priority here. We want to make sure that as the emergency grants are removed, we don't find that there is a revenue gap within the public transport system that means that services start to disappear. We do know that, as I mentioned before, in particular on the bus system, we saw a very rapid return a large proportion of demand. These are quite often residents working in lower paid employment who are completely dependent on the bus system to be able to access that employment. We have to make sure that that reach is maintained, and those people who are returning into the job market, and we know, as Simon talked about earlier on the agenda, that will be in greater numbers over the next few years, that public transport is available to help people to make those journeys. So that's very much the focus of our efforts and our dialogue with the department. And as those forward plans start to come to fruition, Chair, I'd be very happy to come back and perhaps talk through further the shape of those plans with the committee.
Thank you very much, Simon. Final question from Councillor Robinson, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question and a comment. As with the Greater Manchester Mayor, who wants to run an inside bus service for Greater Manchester on the same level as London, why, if that happens, why would our bus services cost us a lot more to use than London if we're going to base what we want on the London transport strategy? I mean, it's a dearer area to live. It's a dearer area for work, and the wages are higher, and yet their transport that they use their buses for is a lot lower than we are now. And if we want to do the same as London, it has to be cheaper than what you're asking us for on that level. Now, on another issue, when you're talking about safety on the roads, I was going to a Bed Every Night theatre workshop at the university at Whitworth Park. I got off the bus and I crossed over the road, only to be knocked over not once but twice by two students coming out of the park and riding on the pavement. So we also need to tell people that are using bicycles that it's dangerous how they use them on the pavement. There are disabled people, there are blind people, there's mums with buggies and prams, that some students just think they can ride their bike anywhere willy-nilly. It took me quite a shock to get over that in this meeting that I went to, because I was knocked over not once but twice. So the safety aspect has got to be up front on that. And on another issue, in quite a number of countries, it's the design of bicycles. You want more people on bikes, it's your design of bicycles. We do know we have a few tricycles around for people that are using them for therapy. If they've had road accidents or strokes or anything, the tricycles, one wheel at the front, two wheels at the back, you'll get a lot more of the older people would be willing to try them because the balance would be a lot better. They would try them on the road. So can you please look at the design of some of the bicycles for the elderly population to get them out and about? Thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Robinson. The very simple answer to the question around levels of fares in London is that Transport for London has access to a series of funds that are not available to us here in Greater Manchester. Historically, since the establishment of Transport for London, there was the London Travel Grant, which was an additional and discretionary grant that was made by central government to Transport for London, and that was replaced some years ago now by the devolved business rates mechanism in London, which provides that funding base for TfL. So we start from a very different position in terms of our funds here in Greater Manchester. The point around bikes on pavements is absolutely well made, and Nicola talked before about the streets policies and the streets design work that we're carrying out with local authorities, and that's crucial because clearly we need to make sure that we have the right mechanisms in place that discourage cycles on pavements, but equally we need to make sure that there's the right provision on highway for cycling that means that people feel comfortable and safe to be able to cycle on the highway. And the final point is a really good point, and there's a lot of good work that's underway in partnership with colleagues across the Health and Social Care Partnership to look at how cycling can contribute to a whole range of health and social care therapies. And you're absolutely right, Councillor Robinson, for that to work well, we need to make sure that people have access to a range of different types of bikes, and Nicola referred to e-bikes as well before, so that we can encourage people back into cycling, but we can be very, very clear that cycling does not necessarily mean a sort of lycra clad 30-mile cycle for everybody.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Simon. Before I go further, can I remind members that the contents of the chat box are a public document, and that anything contained therein is available for others to view.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to make that point. I haven't been political in this meeting one bit.
No, I'm not pointing the finger at individual members. Members will take their own judgment on that, please. I'm going to indulge Councillor Shilton-Godwin on one final comment, please, before we come to close this debate. Councillor Shilton-Godwin, please.
You're live, Councillor Shilton-Godwin.
Mandy, you're live. You've got the box round you. Mandy?
It doesn't seem like she can hear us, Chair.
Councillor Shilton-Godwin. I'm sorry she can't hear us, and therefore we can't. No. And she's not picked up Councillor Gibson's helpful chat box comment, obviously. No, I'm sorry, we're going to have to move on in that case. Can I thank Simon, Nicola and Jonathan for the presentation. Councillor Shilton-Godwin, if you're speaking, you're muted. No. I'm sorry, we'll have to move on, unfortunately. Members are asked to review and endorse the documents referred to, the Greater Manchester Transport Strategy 2040 and the 5-year transport delivery plan. Clearly, some members had a chance to read them in detail. They are both substantial documents, and if there are further points that come out when you read them further, I'm sure that an email through Joanne to Simon, Nicola or Jonathan would be helpful before it goes to the CA meeting. But in terms of that's being presented, are members happy to note the two documents?
Note them, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed.
Can I just add on to the recommendation though? Simon volunteered to give us a feedback in the future on the return. You know, it's going to be an absolute vital part of our future in the next 12 or 18 months. So that feedback would be extremely helpful.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to suggest when we come to the future work programme, we include this as an ongoing item for regular updates. Okay, members happy with that?
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. We move then. Thank you, Simon Co. We move then to item 8, the National Waste and Resources Strategy, implications for Greater Manchester. And we have, hopefully for this one, presentation.
Yeah, by Paul Morgan, Chair.
Right, Paul, thank you.
Good evening, Chair. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Paul Morgan. I'm the Head of Commercial Services in your Waste and Resources team here within the Combined Authority. The purpose of the report is to bring members up to date on the work done by the Waste and Resources team on the English Resources and Waste Strategy, which was published just over 2 years ago. It sounds we're bringing this late to you, but there have been a number of consultations, and a consultation is due very shortly, so it was timely to update you on that. The report has 3 recommendations. Firstly, to note the report, to note the proposed scenario modelling, and then thirdly, to note the draft timetable for the development of a Greater Manchester waste strategy. As I'm sure we're all aware, waste affects the lives of every Greater Manchester resident one way or another on a daily basis. So any proposals to change the services delivered are going to be quite important and keenly viewed by those residents. The English strategy seeks to push waste and resource management in England to a new level, and that's something that in principle we strongly support. At section 1.1 of the report, there are some key aspects of the strategy listed, and as you can see there are implications of how rubbish is collected and how many and how changes may well be funded. Government has completed a first round of consultations, but another round is anticipated towards the end of this first quarter of 2021. In preparation of these, the CA has spoken to DEFRA, the supporting government department, which has provided some useful insights, and that has informed our thinking along the way. So what are the potential implications for Greater Manchester? At a high level, the government wants to see a municipal waste recycling rate of 65% from both household and from both business waste, and by 2035. How we get there is a key question, obviously. Initially, and following, if you think of your own bins at home, the non-recyclable waste bin, the residual waste bin, initially the government sought non-recyclable waste collections to be no less than fortnightly, that the recycling should be a core set of materials and that paper and glass should be kept apart, and that the food waste that's currently commingled with garden waste should be collected separately on a weekly basis. And indeed, all the businesses across the country should also have access to and use recycling services similar to those offered to householders. A requirement to mandate fortnightly non-recyclable waste collections would be a challenge for 4 of the authorities across Greater Manchester, as they operate 3 weekly services. And a reversal of those 3 weekly services back to fortnightly would have a negative impact on the success of their recycling, as well as incur significant costs and also the inconvenience of the change. And we believe strongly that the selection of frequency of that particular bin should be a matter of local democratic choice, not one of government mandate. However, in our discussions with DEFRA, they have indicated that they have come to an agreement with that, and that the frequency of the collection of the non-recyclable waste bin is a matter of a local matter, which is reassuring. However, on the weekly food waste, they are very strong that that material should be collected on that basis. And this is based on a belief that if you collect food waste on a weekly basis, that you do actually collect more. The data isn't quite clear on this, and that'll be something that we'll be challenging with the government. But we have done some modelling work on the collection and downstream treatment of food waste and the costs of those. And what we do now is effectively the cheapest option. However, the most expensive option is the weekly collection, which would require a significantly enlarged fleet of vehicles across the conurbation. However, cost isn't the only consideration. We have to think of carbon as well. And actually, a weekly separate collection of food waste allows the use of technologies that promote the decomposition of food waste and capture the gas arising so that it can be used to generate electricity. And it's these kind of things that form part of the evidence base that we'll use to inform our consultation responses. To aid our thinking on dry recycling, we've commissioned further work to look at how dry recycling may be affected by the strategy proposals. We are modelling what we do now, naturally, and comparing it against the costs and performance of 2 key scenarios. These scenarios have been listed within the strategy. One of them is a version of our 2-bin recycling, but alongside fortnightly residual waste collections, weekly food and free garden waste. The second scenario is curb sort. This is where householders are given a number of boxes to sort the individual materials into, which are then collected on a weekly basis into different compartments on a vehicle. You can imagine in a conurbation like ours, that poses significant challenges. And alongside this, we are also developing a strategy for how we deal with our bio waste, our mixed organic and food waste, to buy us some thinking time so that we can implement some changes later on. Obviously, one of the key questions here is how are the changes going to be paid for? The government has said that any change to weekly food waste collection when not already being delivered will be funded through the central new burdens budget. More novelly, for the recycling collections, These will be financially supported by a scheme called Extended Producer Responsibility. That is where the operators in the packaging supply chain will actually contribute to the collection, recycling, recovery and disposal of the materials that they put on the market. But the level of contribution to each authority will be linked to the expected level of performance of that authority and how far they go to achieving that. So when's all this likely to happen? The strategy says from 2023. It's a couple of years away, so not long, but from is the key word. The government has recognised the need that there are contracts in place that need to time to expire and then new contracts to be let, and of course vehicle replacement programmes are key, and it looks like there will be an 8-year transitionary period from 23 to 31 to enable the changes to take place. So what are we doing about it in Greater Manchester? Apart from building our evidence base through the modelling, we plan to develop a new waste strategy for Greater Manchester, and at 4.1 of the report we provide an indicative timescale for that. Members will be involved in that process through the Waste and Resources Committee, I presume, and that may well take us a couple of years, also having to take into account the government's direction. To end, Chair, over the coming years, we need to prepare for potential changes in the way waste is collected, but we should reassure the committee that the CA and the districts are working very hard and together to understand how those changes may well be implemented, and we will keep members fully informed. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. I just smile quietly to myself when I think that just over 40 years ago, 1978, I stood outside Bolton Town Hall with a large skip with 3 openings in it for clear green and brown glass, and launched the first bottle bank in Bolton, and we were the delight of hearing a bottle shatter as it hit the bottom of the container. I reflect how things have moved on in the last 40 or so years. So yes, it's an interesting subject area. It's one that always intrigues me. But I've got a couple of questions from members at the moment. Councillor August, please.
Thank you, Chair. I don't often agree with the government on this, but I think it is a noble thing to try and standardise what we do in terms of recycling across the nation. Yeah, I think it's absolutely ludicrous at the moment that you can't recycle your bottle tops in Salford, but if you cross over the border into Trafford, you can. But I do have some issues with their criteria at the moment. I just had a few questions. I'm not an expert in composting, you know, for my sins, but they are requiring anaerobic biogas production as part of the food waste collection. And my question really relates to our climate emergency, because although biogas production is carbon neutral, it does still give off greenhouse gases for its combustion. If we were to stick with our in-vessel composting, am I correct in saying that we would, it's effectively a carbon sink, in that we are keeping the carbon in the environment? And do we really have plans in Greater Manchester to increase our use of biogas? I mean, I don't think we are looking to put it in our cars. We're looking for electrified cars. I don't know of any great electricity stations that use biogas. We're looking at solar, wind and hydroelectricity. So I'm wondering, really, is biogas something that we're going to be producing lots of through this proposal that isn't actually going to be future-proofed long term? And I wondered if that's something that we'd looked at in terms of our response to the government for this consultation. I completely agree with you with the number of receptacles that are being proposed by the government here. I think it's really short-sighted to think of people in flats and, you know, small terraced house streets to have this number of receptacles out on the street. Where are people going to park? Where are people going to be able to get their buggies past, and those sorts of things? I just had a question. You said that we would, there are 4 boroughs that would struggle in terms of weekly food collection. I didn't realise we had anywhere that didn't do weekly, at least food and garden collection at the moment. So I wondered which ones they were and how often they're collecting at the moment. I'll leave it at that because I know we're short on time and other people have questions.
Okay, thank you, Chair. On to zip through those, the biogas production, the work we've done on comparing in-vessel composting with anaerobic digestion has actually showed that anaerobic digestion is by far the better carbon solution, and the gas given off itself can be then combusted to generate the electricity to sort of self-feed the system as well as feed back into the grid. There are various forms of anaerobic digestion to use, and I won't go into those.
Sorry, Paul, can I just clarify quickly? The combustion, it doesn't give off the carbon, but it does give off other greenhouse gases. Am I right?
It will do. Yes, just it will give off CO2 as a byproduct. Yes, it will do. But yes, that is something we've looked at and will be used in our thinking. Use of biogas across data. I don't think we've looked at that itself, however, across been looked at, because there will potentially be a lot of biogas generated if all this food waste that's not being collected suddenly goes through the system. But it's something to take back and look at with the environment team. And the weekly collections was in relation to non-recyclable waste. It was that was 3 weekly collections, wasn't it? Food waste at the moment is a mix of frequencies across the conurbation for 2 reasons. One, because we're still in the winter and garden waste is of lower generation quantities, and secondly, I think there are authorities who have trimmed back to a slightly lesser frequency to cope with staffing numbers because of absences related to COVID. The aim would be to have weekly or at the very least fortnightly collections of mixed organics.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson, please. Brief comment, recognising the time.
Chair, it's a very brief comment on exactly that topic. I think a weekly green bin or food waste collection would be very welcome. We've been without ours in Stockport for the best part of a year now. We've been reduced to 2 weekly collection when our residents have been used to weekly collection, and certainly from my casework inbox, I can say with some certainty that that is not what residents want. So I think that's a very welcome change, and I look forward to us having that standardised across Greater Manchester. Thank you.
I think a comment there, Councillor Gibson, rather than a question, but it's noted. You've made your point. Can we therefore note the report and the options that have been put before us and look forward to further reports as matters progress?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. We look forward to further appearance, Paul, in due course.
Be a pleasure.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Can we come then to item 9, the work programme? Joanne?
It's for information, Chair, and for member comment.
Okay.
So it's just for members. Thank you.
I think we've said tonight that there are 2 items that we want to come back on a periodic basis, the transport strategy and the matter we've just discussed, the waste strategy.
Yes,
and
well, those, Chair.
Issues related to COVID-19 remain extant items on the agenda.
Yes.
We will, before the next meeting, seek to have set up a meeting of the subgroup looking at homelessness and related matters. And a number of members have expressed interest in that group. We will make sure that something happens and there is a report to the next meeting.
Okay.
Councillor Billington in a message also refers to the fact that we have said it's an ongoing one, that the spatial framework in its changed format, given Stockport's position, we need to monitor and retain on the agenda on an ongoing basis, and that will be part and parcel of our ongoing agenda. Okay, members happy with that?
Yes.
Items for information, nothing other than the register of key decisions, which is circulated to us on a regular basis. I'm sure it's required bedtime reading for all members. Being diligent and assiduous in your duties as representatives. And I'm certainly glad certain members are nodding in agreement, Councillor Hayes. The next meeting is the 4th of February, and again, in the circumstances, that will be a Teams meeting.
Okay.
Can I thank you all for your attendance? I'm sorry, Mandy, we couldn't get your question earlier. You were speaking to yourself, and unfortunately, we weren't able to hear you. So apologies for that. Technology is not perfect. But thank you for your attendance, everyone. Declare the meeting closed. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.